it. Everything is being recorded. And so welcome to part one of navigating a career pivot. I am super excited to be joined by two individuals that I have very recently gotten to know and have a huge career crush on. So you're in for a big treat today. And before we get really into the nuts and bolts of everything, I wanted to just bring two dates up to remind you of two kind of cool things coming up in the world of alumni engagement for the School of Business. The first is that this is, like I said, this is part one of our career pivoting series. Part two will be on March the 18th at 12 o'clock. And we're going to take all of the things that we learned today, and we're going to hear from actual alumni from the School of Business and Wake Forest who have made a really significant career pivot. And so I've got three or hopefully four alums who are going to talk about what was successful for them, some of the things, some obstacles that they ran into, and then provide some real good content that will hopefully help you either make the decision or make big strides forward in your professional journey. So register in advance, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 18th. And then we're also super excited about Alumni Weekend. And so this year, Alumni Weekend will be on April the 19th and 20th. It's a 2-day event. The first day on Friday, there's not too much programming, just a lot of fun and a welcome reception. And then Saturday morning is jam-packed full of all kinds of professional development topics, such as making a good career pivot, LinkedIn, resumes. We've got the librarians from the School of Business who are going to talk about how to access resources from the school after you graduate. And then my personal favorite is the director of our wellness program here on campus is going to talk about building resilience inside and outside of your professional life. And then the sixth one is on AI. So get excited. We're gonna wrap up the weekend with watching our amazing baseball team play Virginia Tech that evening. So all those details are on our website. I hope you'll come to Winston-Salem. We welcome you back in open arms and hope you will consider it. And so here we go. Making a career pivot, right? Navigating this it could be a very emotional space for people. It could be a very scary place for people. And so I have invited two of my new, I'm going to call them friends, who I've just recently gotten to know as I move into this new role, who not only have made significant career pivots, but they help professionals in executive coaching. They do advising. They both live in Charlotte. They've both had rich careers in financial services and nonprofit. They're very well connected. And you're in for a real treat as they have put together some really great content, things that you need to think about as you make a pivot. So if everybody will go on mute, make sure you're on mute, and I will monitor the chat. And so if you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to drop any kind of questions or comments in the chat. We'll leave time at the end for some Q&A, and let's get started. So first off, I have Megan Spivey here. Megan graduated from the School of Business. I'm not going to put any dates around that. She's got a degree in business enterprise management, right?
Yes. Yep.
And so, like I said, she lives and works in Charlotte. She's had this unbelievable career in financial services. And she is the owner and operator of, I want to get it right, Career Outfitters.
You got it. You got it.
Outfitters. So welcome, Megan. Secondly, I am joined by Kristin Winkle Beck Kristin graduated with a psychology major from Wake Forest. She is. I love this term. I've adopted it, Kristin. She has a career portfolio. She's doing a lot of things. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about those, but she also has made multiple career pivots in her career. And just like Megan, offers her services to professionals, right? So that we can all live our very best lives. So ladies, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to let you take over and just sit here and manage the chat. Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Sharron. So Kristin and I actually, we'll get to this important part of pivoting around your network, but we did come up with kind of a three-prong approach that we're going to share today, and it's needs, narrow, and then network. So just to kick off with needs, like this is to Kristin and me, the most important part of this process is really reflecting there. So I have made pivots primarily by choice, and Kristin, when we talk about needs, she's going to talk about some of the pivots she's made that were not by choice. So just jumping right in, I've made a total of 6 career pivots of varying degrees, and even underneath those, I could probably count a few more within companies. You know how things can change. So when I think about how I did this, I really got clear on non-negotiable. So I'm going to give you 2 examples, and hopefully this helps crystallize this idea of needs. So the first one was my first career pivot. On paper, the most confusing one to others that I still explain. I went from investment banking, got recruited out of the School of Business at Wake by Wachovia at the time. That's what brought me to Charlotte, where I still am. And I kind of knew going into that was not my forever career. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind. But when it got time to make that pivot, as the world drastically changed in 08 and 09, and it was an interesting time to be changing, I was very clear that my number one criteria was learning something new that I was interested in. So maybe we add 2 criteria there. That was it. I mean, I was open to location. I was pretty flexible on compensation. I was in my mid-20s. I'd done pretty well at the bank. So those were my 2. And I landed in technology infrastructure at another bank. Again, it'll come back to networking, but that was one pivot that I would share. The most recent pivot I made was a very different criteria. I had 2 small children, and I had worked my way back into banking, and compensation and location really drove that pivot. So I went from, helping support our family, and then I had to make a pivot where our family was rooted in Charlotte. So those really drove my decision about where to go. And so I'll stop there. Those were kind of by choice pivots that I made, and kind of the criteria that drove them. And I'll hand it to Kristin to talk about maybe some of her pivots that weren't as much by choice as maybe mine were.
Yeah, I think, when we started talking about how do people pivot, there's really 2 things that come about, right? Either you have reached a point personally or professionally where you desire a significant change, right? Or conditions are forced upon you, right? I have lived through a layoff, right? I was told my services were no longer needed. My position had been eliminated. And that was clear back at what became the very beginning stages of the Great Recession. And I found out, I was probably one of the first people I knew that was laid off. And I found out in the fall of 2007, that in 2008, I was not going to be, that in 08, I wasn't going to have a job. So I'll also say that, pivots don't have to be these big drastic things. And I think you will see throughout our storyline and throughout some of the things we talk about is sometimes pivots are big. Hey, I quit a job, or I was laid off and I went from working every day, all day, more than 40 hours a week to no man's land, right? With no real plan, to incremental changes. And so I really want to put the framework around pivots don't necessarily all happen in one big leap. Sometimes they are a series of incremental steps. And so I've done both, to be very honest with you. My background, as Sharron said, was coming out of Wake Forest as a liberal arts major. I was recruited off campus by Capital One and spent the next 20 years moving through financial services in a varying degree of operations, supply chain, strategic business to business relationship management. During that first 20 years, I made 4 interstate and intercompany moves in 6 years. Some of those were because personally I needed to relocate from Richmond, Virginia, where Capital One was, to Charlotte. That happened 20 years ago. And then I took a opportunity that I didn't necessarily, it found me. I didn't go looking for it, but I moved to Atlanta and then I got laid off. And when I think about how did I navigate each one of those changes, it has to get rooted in self-reflection. It has to get rooted in the non-negotiables. For those of you who are a homeowner who have ever looked for somewhere to live, you have this massive wish list of everything you want in a home. I want all these things. The fact of the matter is you're probably not going to get everything on that list. And I would say the same thing holds true in your career or in your professional life. You can have a laundry list of, flexibility and compensation and benefits and geography and day-to-day work, right? You can have this huge list of things you want. What you have to be very focused on, what are the non-negotiables? I have to make at least this much money. I provide the benefits for my family. I need healthcare and retirement and X, Y, and Z, right? And what I would also say is that is not a set it and forget it list. It is okay if your circumstances have changed. I have coached women or individuals who stepped out of the workforce to focus on raising a family or taking care of an elderly sick parent and have had to return because conditions in their family or in their spousal employment or their marriage or their family situation changed. Each time you contemplate a pivot, I really encourage you to think back to what was most critical. And so in 2008, I was living in Atlanta. I was really unhappy. I'm sorry for anyone that loves living in Atlanta. It was not a good fit for me. And I had left Charlotte to take this professional opportunity with GE in Atlanta. When that layoff notice came, it was actually a blessing in disguise because I was in talks of returning. Like I really wanted to get out of Atlanta and back to Charlotte. And so it kind of forced me into that. So for me, one of the critical needs was I needed a job that would move me back to Charlotte. I happened to be married at the time to someone who was working for the government. And the only way the government would allow my then husband to move was spousal employment. So I had to get a job and I had to get a job quickly. I contemplated a big pivot. I contemplated jumping into coaching back then, but at that time I needed a job in Charlotte. We needed the income for a second income and it needed to happen pretty quickly. I was only out of work 6 weeks. Now I had the blessing of a 60-day notice. So that is not necessarily typical, but I was laser focused on what's going to get me back to Charlotte, what's going to restore my income, and what's going to help me make that move as quickly as possible. So that at the time was a core need. And I would just challenge everyone to say, if you have family conditions, if you have financial conditions, if you have geographic constraints, just be really clear about what those needs are and then be very realistic about what kind of a move will allow you to recognize the maximum number of those non-negotiables. Question, you guys, please ask questions, drop comments or questions in the chat. This is not about Megan and I being talking heads.
While people are, oh, go ahead, Sharron.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, that those non-negotiables, of course, are going to be a big driver in decisions to make a move or not make a move. And so I just wanted to move into the next topic around some of the less non-negotiables, things like passions and interests and the things that really drive you to, get that satisfaction and job, that success ratio that maybe money, doesn't quantify. So can you talk about your interests and passions?
Yeah. So as Kristin and I kind of brainstormed approaching this topic of needs, this of course comes up, and you'll hear live your passion, etc. And so for Kristin and I, we both personally thought about this in two ways. There's side hustle is a big term right now, as well as volunteerism. I'm going to speak to side hustle because as I worked in investment banking and had very little time for much else, I found that for me, being active was a big outlet, and it was something I built community in, and I just grew a passion for. And so then as the years went on, as I was I still am a group exercise instructor. So that's just something I do for fun. But there came a time as like these boutique gyms were popping up where I said, huh, like, could this be a viable business? Like, I love doing this. But the blessing of being someone who was kind of in this with, just part-time, peeking behind the curtain, I got to see up close and personal what it really looked like to live that life, working for people who owned businesses like that. So I still get to kind of express and live in that passion of learning more about the fitness area, leading people in it, but it really showed me that kind of try before you buy mentality. I actually, and just another quick example, I had a Wake Forest alum reach out to me about, and she's in her 40s, the concept of an adult internship. So like, how could she has, she's working part-time, like, is it viable for an adult to go and get an internship? So that was like this beginner's mindset and willingness to try things, whether that's through a side hustle. And I'll hand it to Kristin here in a bit to talk about volunteerism as another way to kind of outlet for your passions and interests, but it also gives you that peek behind the curtain that I think is really important if you're considering a more drastic pivot that reflects passion and interest.
Yeah, I think it's, this whole element of, especially if you're going to make a really big move, one that is a significant move in skills and maybe a significant change in compensation or benefits or the way in which your family is living and working. Sometimes you want to explore it at a deeper level. And so things like a side hustle. I mean, when I meet people, I literally tell them I have a portfolio career. I run a nonprofit full time as an executive director, more than 40 hours a week. I have this executive coaching practice, Pivot Point Professionals. I like to tell people I've been pivoting before pivoting was a thing. And my husband and I, he was part of the Great Resignation, we opened a franchise physical therapy clinic. He has a business degree or a degree in economics, and I have a degree in psychology. We are not physical therapists, right? So, and we have an investment property. So we have cobbled together a lifestyle that is not just reliant on a W-2. And that didn't happen all at once, right? We didn't get into all those things all at the same time. It was gradually staggered and we tried it. But as I was contemplating my move out of corporate America, I did have my own Great Resignation in 2017. I did press the big red button and said, time out, I need a break. But prior to doing that, I went back to school at Wake Forest and got a certification in the nonprofit business program. And I started exploring that while I was still working at Bank of America, because I was exploring, like, is this something I really want to do? And I started to see that maybe I wanted to be a board member of a nonprofit. Maybe I wanted to volunteer more strategically in things like fundraising and marketing and other things that were not operations or supply chain, which I had a career in, right? And so I started dipping my toe in the waters to explore that. And it was through that I could make the decision of, yes, I want to keep moving forward. And ultimately, I started my nonprofit, or I started my coaching practice and decided I didn't love the lifestyle of a solopreneur. I did that for 9 months and decided, you know what, I want to keep this practice, but I want it to be a side hustle. And I shifted my exploration into full-time nonprofit leadership. And that's where, now I have sort of a amalgamation of income streams that are multiple things. That fits me as a multi-passionate person. Doesn't work for everybody, but for me right now in this lifestyle, I'm able to balance running a nonprofit, which I'm passionate about and is exciting and provides stable, steady income, with my coaching profession, with my husband's startup franchise business, right? We have put together sort of this element. But what I will say is, as I was applying for the nonprofit role, number one, I had never worked in nonprofits before. I did go back to school and I did get a certification, which I know helped to prove that I was committed. You don't have to go get a master's degree. You don't have to get any kind of degree. Certifications and learning opportunities from reputable institutions like Wake Forest and others, with the onset of, continuing ed and remote learning, is a great way to learn more about an industry before you go all in. Right. And so that's what I did as I was exploring it. But then the other thing was I volunteered, I fundraised as a volunteer. And so I put that on my resume. I showcased that I was not paid to do it, but yes, I did it. Right. And so even if you're thinking about a big shift, sometimes you can look for opportunities to be part of a nonprofit organization or a community event where you get the chance to flex marketing skills or flex sales or fundraising, which, by the way, fundraising equals sales for anybody that didn't know that. That was a way in which I could build those skills, identify if it was something I enjoyed, but also talk about it as an accomplishment. And that demonstrated to the nonprofit board that was hiring me, I invested in my education, I'd been deeply involved in the community, and I had actually helped organizations fundraise real dollars. So even though I'd never worked in it, it made me a compelling and viable candidate because I had done that. Right. And that was a little bit of Megan's try before you buy, before I sort of went all in on a major shift. Right. I started doing the work. I started investing in being around other people, learning about that industry before I just pulled the trigger and started applying for nonprofit jobs.
You almost created, well, you didn't almost do it. You created experience for yourself where you had none. And so I think it's so appropriate when you think about your needs as a human, right? All of those things Megan and Kristin have been talking about the non-negotiables, and then your interests and passions. You also have to do this technical skills inventory, right? What have I done? What do I know? Like, what's that inventory look like? And then what do I need, right? To Kristin's example, what do I need what do I need to put into this storyline so that I am a compelling candidate for whatever type of direction you decide to go? And so, there's so many opportunities out there to learn a new skill, a new hard skill. There are opportunities in volunteering and side hustles that help you develop and elevate these softer type of professional type of skills. But ladies, do you have any recommendations on like assessments or any kind of resource and tools that people can use to do this inventory of skills?
I mean, I think you have to start with, and I might say before we do that, I think I might go into kind of the narrowing, because when we start talking about how do you narrow down, and I find this particularly challenging, right? I am somebody who needs to be juggling all the things all the time. It's just my personality. If you make me do the same thing over and over, day in, day out, Groundhog's Day, I become quickly bored and my performance suffers for it. So one of the things that I would say is, as you're thinking about those components, from a needs perspective, I think you have to get really clear: compensation, family commitments, hard realities like benefits or retirement, geographic constraints. If you're a person that can work remotely or needs to be in the office, like some of those types of things, like I think are just intuitive to, what your core needs are at this season in your career, right? So I would say get clear on that. As you think about the skill inventory and other things, that's where I would offer narrowing your focus from I could do 10 different things to something that is much more manageable. That's where, in order to go deep enough and explore things, you have to really, especially if you're really wanting out of the industry you're in and you're ready to make a move, but you just don't know what it is, you just know what it's not. And that was me, right? I hit the big red button in 2017 and said, I don't know where my career is going, but it isn't. I don't want it to keep going in the direction I was in. And it was a good on paper job. Like, my family thought I was crazy. My friends were like, what are you thinking? What are you going to do? You quit a job before you had a job. All the things they tell you not to do, right? My faith played a big part in that for me, because I felt a sense of it was time and I needed to move, even though it was an uncomfortable move at the time. So there were a couple of tools that I used to help narrow from this huge, big, the world is your oyster. And as a Wake Forest business graduate, you can do anything. You really can. But that's hard to go. I challenge you to find anything on the job board, right? Like that's not there. So if you guys are okay, I'm going to share with you how I approached my pivot when I was exploring different roles. And
Can
I
I
actually
jump in real quick with a quick needs thing that's very tactical and it'll be quick. I'll let you take a breath. I find a lot of, myself included, the need, like we don't work for free, right? Like this compensation piece. I really found a lot of value in putting clarity to that picture. I used a tool called Mint initially. Now I've transitioned to Monarch, but these are tools that give you your full financial picture in a pane of glass view. So you can really get clear on, I think there's this kind of concept of more is always better. Like if you're not growing in salary, if you're not matching your salary in your next job, you've failed. I think it's really important to get clear on your unique needs, not what society tells you you need, but like doing some actual work around financial like need and like what goals you have. If you do want or need more, what is it going towards? So I found that exercise really helpful at different junctures so I could make the right decisions and when compensation was more important, supporting a family, whatever other commitments you have. I just think that's a key piece of needs that's important to look at more than just like a ballpark salary range that feels good. So sorry, Kristin, happy to move
No, and that's really valid because I will just tell you guys, I was surprised at how much less money I could live on when I took away the expense of working in corporate America. I wasn't commuting. I wasn't paying monthly parking. I wasn't paying for dry cleaning. I wasn't paying to eat lunch out every day. And all of a sudden, a lot of expenses that I thought were core expenses went away. I want to address Matt's question, which is how is the best way to say I don't want to do this type of work without indicating you're running away from something versus running towards something. And I will tell you that last part of the question of running away versus running towards is a core thing I talk with my clients about all the time. If you are employed today, you are incredibly blessed, and this is the best time to start planning your pivot. I would tell you, I would hold that very close to the vest until you are much clearer about where you are and where you want to go. You can start having those conversations with friends and family, but as far as communicating that to an employer or to a boss or to a leader, I held that very close until I really was clear about what I wanted to do and where I was going. So I would say, use the time while you are employed to do your homework, make the time to do this research, to figure out what you really want, to do networking and explore what's out there before you declare you're leaving, lest you be passed over for promotions, lest you be on that short list of layoffs. Like you don't want to do anything that's going to hamper your current situation. But at the same time, as a professional, for them to think that you're going to retire from the job you're in, unless you're, 59 and a half or 62 or 64 and a half, like that's pretty unreasonable. So I would just say, I wouldn't probably, clarify. Okay. For prospective employers, I think it is absolutely about, I have had a very successful career in ABC industry. I have amassed a deep set of skills. Blah, 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 blah. My passions are no longer there. I am more and more interested about this. And I've done these 5 things to explore this industry. And the more I learn, the more I want to learn. And I am confident that my work ethic, that these skills that transfer can be applied in this new direction, right? So it is an intentional choice. I went through this when I was hired by the nonprofit. I very clearly said, I went and took the Wake Forest program for 9 months and got this programming. I've been volunteering in a strategic capacity with an executive director to help her raise XYZ. I have served in these organizations. Like I showed examples of things I had done and achievements I had and what I bring to your organization, which by the way, my nonprofit is the amalgamation and synergy of business acumen, running nonprofits, of coaching, and of volunteerism for purpose. So I had experiences as a volunteer. I had this knowledge as a nonprofit professional from my coursework, and I had actually raised money. plus all the business experience I was bringing to the table to run an organization as the senior leader, right? So you're getting all these things, and here's how I can help you advance your company. So it was very intentional.
I look at it as value-based narrative, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I want to leave this industry to go to this industry, switch your mindset and the narrative around, just like Kristin said, I've accomplished all of these things. I have all these skills. I have all these characteristics that you need, and let me add value to your organization based off of this experience. Just changing the perspective and the narrative a little bit, to be a value-based conversation. I think.
And I think the old school rule of you never bash a former employer, you never bash a bad boss, like that might be the real reason that you've decided, but you need to take the higher road and, you know, really center it on, here's what I bring to the table. Here's why I'm excited about this. Here's how I can help you and your company and your team. And here's why I think I'm the right person for the role. It's very forward, very, here's how I'm going to add value to the conversation. Let's shift gears. I want to share with you a tool that I used when I was exploring, because the nonprofit sector was but one of the potential sort of verticals I was looking at. And I used a tool that I call the Career Search Matrix, and Sharron can send this around for all of you. But essentially what you start with is you might have ideas of industries or of positions that you want to explore. Sharron, if you will enable multiple participants to share in your controls, I can show this matrix. But I want you to think through all the industries that you might consider. Think through all the types of jobs you might have. And by types of jobs, I mean things like project management or human resources or sales executive, right? Or account executive, those types of things. But I want you to just do a brain dump of all the possibilities. And then I want you to rank order them. And the reason that I say rank ordering is because you do need to bring a little bit of clarity to your approach. And so I hope you guys can see this. I'm gonna make it bigger so that you can. So this is the career search matrix that I start most conversations with my clients. And so essentially across the top, the columns are the top 3 most interesting or likely industry verticals that you would pursue. And then on the left-hand side, the job families are the types of job functions. Doesn't necessarily have to be the exact job title, but you want to consider that. And then across the bottom, the locations that you're open to. Now, this is obviously not a 3-dimensional page. So essentially, I'll just use myself as an example. I'm in a season of life where I have aging in-laws here in town in Charlotte. My husband has a new business that's brick and mortar. We're pretty well rooted in the Charlotte community. So for me, I don't have 3 locations. I have 2. I have the Charlotte metro area and I have remote, right? And so essentially, instead of, because it's not 3-dimensional, you would have 1 page of this for every location that you would be exploring. And what you essentially do is you think through companies in this industry that have this type of job at the intersection, and you start to fill this matrix out with prospective target organizations or companies that you want to explore. Then you start to do more research on those companies. You start to, and when we talk about networking, the importance of finding people that are inside those companies, right? So you're trying to make this pie in the sky, I could do anything for any company anywhere, into something that is contained and more manageable. Right. Some of you who are like, ooh, gosh, I don't even know what that would be. I know it feels restrictive, but what I have found is that if you start going broad and you do not go deep enough into an industry or into a job category, you will never know, and you will never do enough due diligence to identify whether or not that's a move you could realistically make, or whether or not it would be a move you would want to make. Right? The other way you can use this chart, if you are a more people-centered or relation-centered person, is you might start with, who do I know that works in either these job families or in these companies? And how do I connect with that? And we're going to spend more time on the networking side of it, but ultimately helping to narrow your focus. So what happens is, as you start to go deep and you use your discretionary time to research, you set up job alerts on places like LinkedIn or Indeed or other job boards, you start to go, gosh, you know, I thought I might be open to healthcare. The more I learn, the more I'm like, that's not a good fit for me. So I'm going to take that off the list. You either narrow it then to 2x3 or 2x2, or you take number 4 in your industry rank order and pop that into the number 3 place. But this gives you a way to center your search, your research, and your networking so that you can do enough exploration, enough due diligence, and enough evaluation of, do I really want to pursue continuing to look in this industry or in this job family? Does that make sense to
Kristin,
people?
I love it. And I can tell from just my experience just with working with Wake Forest, we'll call us Wake Foresters, right? They really appreciate this type of a grid, and it's like you're using data, right, to narrow your focus. And so super helpful. Megan, what kind of comments do you have on narrowing?
No, I think this is great. I think the people piece will come into play here shortly, but the other, like, if you're not a grid thinker, another exercise you could try on, if you're like, I'm not even sure where to start, the whole, like, I know it's not this, is I call it the calendar audit. So look back at what you've done recently, professionally, like take the last 2 weeks, month. What are those things you've done that have excited you, lit you up? Like, what is the common thread you can pull out in your most recent experience? There's usually something that can then start to inform, or maybe it wasn't at work, but you had a conversation with somebody. Maybe it was at church, at a gym, at wherever community or groups you're a part of that piqued an interest. And just look back. Like, I think sometimes it's daunting to see, like, there's so many things. How can I possibly look at where you've been and try to time box it, make it recent, and what piqued your interest, what skills that can at least get you started. I like to do that when people are just overwhelmed with not this, but I can't even begin to wrap my head around what.
I don't know how many of you have ever really reflected on your values and the things that really drive you to get out of bed every day. And to Megan's point, right? Looking at the things that you've been a part of in your life, and I'll send a link to this values exercise as well, so you can do it yourself. But you'll start to see the things that drive your decisions are based off of your values. And so, for an example, my top 3 values are family, professional development, and philanthropy. Right? So, isn't it fantastic, right, that I can live in Winston-Salem, close to my family? My parents are here. My husband's parents were here. That I can work in a space that, I mean, this is higher ed. It's a college, right? It's a university. I'm surrounded by learning opportunities all the time. And then I get to sit in a really unique space where I get to help people. I do get paid to help people, but when they all come together and you go through this values exercise to understand what drives you, right, internally, that internal, compass that says, I'm not happy. A lot of times when you start to become unhappy, either in your personal life or your professional life, it's because your values are being compromised. So if family is number 1 important to me, and I'm working 85, 90 hours at my job, that might even tick number 2 and number 3, I'm going to be unhappy because I can't spend any time with my family. Right?
Yeah.
And so
all goes back to that needs, right? And alignment, the self-reflection. And so far we've kind of talked about looking inward as you narrow it. Looking at your calendar, the things you like, the things that light you up, looking at possibilities, brainstorming possibilities, thinking about your needs. Megan, can you share with us a little bit about kind of the role of what role should, because we also don't live in a bubble, right? We're not able to just create this magical job and company opportunity, right? We would be remiss if we did not consider the broader macroeconomic and just reality of what's going on in the world. So Megan, can you talk a little bit more about the role that sort of the industry and sort of economic trends should play in this narrowing exercise?
Yeah, I think the tip I give here is not to get sucked in by broad headlines. You need to contextualize your situation. So whether that is by geography, like I rely a lot more on the Charlotte Business Journal for like local market pulse than I do on the Wall Street Journal. And so I would be, somewhat aware of the trends in your specific geography. If that's a qualifier for you, one of your needs is to stay local, you want to be in an office, like qualify geography. And then the other thing I like to do is you'll hear headlines like, oh, big tech's going through, like these headlines are meant to like pull you in, hook you in with doom and gloom, but you have to check them. So maybe it's recruiting, like recruiting has taken a big hit, hiring has slowed down. Guess what? I have a client who recently switched from recruiting financials or consultants, we'll call them, into cybersecurity like consultants. So recruiting itself is not a no function right now or in a tough economic climate. You just have to be thoughtful about where are the areas of demand. So I think it's just all about contextualizing. Geography is great in terms of a function. Are there different sub functions or sub focus areas? And that's kind of the punchline there is don't take a headline at face value, challenge it based on your needs and where you've narrowed in.
And that's where really leaning into experts in those industries or in those fields, right? Especially if it's unknown to you. You don't want to just make assumptions based on what you're reading in the news or what you're seeing. You want to talk to people who've been in that industry a long time or who've really, know what's really going on in the tech sector or in the startup ecosystem in a particular city or in a particular area. And that kind of lends us to, if you were hoping that you could sit behind your, in the safety of your own home, behind a comfortable screen, and just do all of this without ever talking to anyone, I'm here to dash your dreams and tell you that that's probably not possible, because over 85% of jobs come from networking. And I'm not saying that I want you to walk into a room if you're an extreme introvert. I'm not saying I want you to go into a sea of 500 people and start passing out, or connecting with people on LinkedIn. What I am saying, though, is that at the end of the day, the only way anybody I ever know that has gotten a job is by going through an interview process, and that involved talking to somebody. Right. So you can use technology like LinkedIn, like these kinds of events, right? I would make note of all the people that are on this call today. Take down their information, send them a personalized note on LinkedIn and say, I was on the Wake Forest pivot thing. If you ever need, if you ever want to connect, and I'd love to hear your story, I'd love to tell you mine. Maybe we can help one another. Start small, so start safe. Start where you're a little more comfortable, because it's a muscle that you build. It is momentum that you can really start getting things moving. And I tend to use a lot of home ownership examples, but it's like if you dreamed of living in a neighborhood, and every time you go into the MLS system and it's like the next house, it's not on the market 2 days and it's sold and under contract, you got to start searching the hidden market. You got to do the same thing in the job market too. A lot of times jobs are not posted, or they're posted after the fact, especially if it's being filled by somebody internally. So you don't want to spend a bunch of time doing something, applying for a job, only to find out that it really wasn't a bona fide job offer anyway. They had an internal candidate they were going to hire anyway, right? The only way you know that is by talking to people, by getting on the inside track. And you also don't want to jump out of the fire and into the frying pan. Maybe you're in a toxic work culture. Maybe it's not respecting your boundaries, or you're having to work more than is feasible at this season of life, and your company doesn't seem to understand that. The only way you are going to know whether or not the prospective new company operates that way is to talk to people that work there today or have worked there recently, right? So let's shift the conversation a little bit to, once you get a little clearer on what you absolutely need and what you're looking for, and you started to narrow the focus, how do you lean into relationships and conversations to advance and really start to narrow exactly into target industries or target companies that you really want to go to work for? So Megan, what's your best advice on that daunting networking term that many people despise?
Yeah. I'd actually invite everyone to throw out the term networking, replace it with curious conversations. Because when done correctly, that's really what networking is. So Matt, your question earlier about, how do you say this thing? Like, I'm not running away from something. I really am interested in this. my thought there is make it more about them and less about you. As long as you can speak to what their needs are first here, the whole, like, we've got 2 ears, one mouth for a reason. Like, really, that ratio should hold true in these conversations. They should be talking, especially in an informational style, where you're trying to gather information to test whether this would be the right move for you. What are the needs? What are the pain points? Get people talking. And when you do make an outreach for that type of conversation, I'm going to invite you also, in addition to replacing the term networking with curious conversation, banish the terms pick your brain. It's just not like when you really like just say it and stop, you're like, ooh, that's like just not pleasant. And then
like cringeworthy now.
Yeah, like you just like, ugh, and then catch up. Can we just catch up? If you can be a little more specific and say, I'd really love to learn more about X. You made a recent job move. I'd love to hear what that really is like day to day. Would you be willing to share that over, 15, 30 minutes? I think the more specific you can be and genuinely curious, I think networking becomes a lot easier.
If you
If
think
you bring
about
that-
it, I always challenge people to think about this. If you approach networking or curious conversations in the perspective of, I need you to give me a job. If I turned around and said, Megan, can you get me a job at your firm? That's a hard question to answer.
And a hard no.
It's a hard no, right?
Well, I'm sorry, would love to help, but I don't know of any jobs.
Yeah. And so you're not asking for a job. Are you hoping the conversation leads you into information that can then equip you to one day maybe get a job where she works? Yes, that's why we're doing it, right? But approach it in, Megan, I would love your advice on what it's like to work at Bank of America. She can give you advice, and people want to give advice, right? That makes them feel good. It's the Wake Forest way, pro humanitate. I'm going to be in service to other humans. I have history. I have advice. That's a little easier, yes, than can you help me get a job?
Yeah.
Right? So it softens
Absolutely.
the whole conversation, and you'll get more out of it if you approach it that way.
Absolutely.
I would also say start and Sharron, one of the other things we could offer up as a resource, which we didn't really talk about, but I know it's out there, is I did a specific networking webinar for Wake Forest a few years ago. It's a 30-minute, it was a lunch and learn type of thing. We can send out the link to that. It's housed on the university's YouTube channel. For people who just that networking thing is just an ominous, I don't even know where to start. There's a lot of very practical, tactile things you can do. And what I would say is start easy and start where you feel some momentum. So if it's, hey, I only have 150 connections on LinkedIn and I want to get that to 500, which, by the way, if you've been in the work world, any amount of time, you should have 500. How do I do that? I don't even know. Like, start there, right? Start where you get some energy. Reach back out to your favorite boss. Reach back out to your favorite coworker. Reach out to somebody that is a friend of yours that lights up every time they talk about their company and say, I just want to learn more about why you're so excited to be at ABC company, right? People love to tell their stories. They love to be asked for advice, and that's an easy yes, right? And I think making those requests with the understanding of what do you have in common? Why do you want to talk to them? Makes it easier for them to say yes. I see we both went to Wake Forest School of Business. You're working in advertising. I've always been really curious about that. Can you tell me, would you spend 15 minutes and tell me about your journey and how you started in the field? Those kinds of things are easy yeses for people versus
I have
walking into a
amazing,
room.
yeah. We have an amazing library that have already started to curate on the art of a successful informational interview. And so it's, I'll include all of those links so that you can continue to learn, about how to do it effectively, and hopefully make it a little bit easier on you. So we're coming up, right? We got 10 minutes left. I want to keep us on time. Ladies, talk a little bit more, if you will, in this networking piece on LinkedIn. Like, let's just spend a minute to talk about LinkedIn, the power of the platform, And to me, it's a non-negotiable when you're in a job search or any kind of career pivot. You got to be on LinkedIn. And so, Megan,
Yeah, I like to think of LinkedIn as it's a conversation platform. It's not really meant to be a set it and forget it. Some people treat it like their virtual resume, and I think that's a miss. I think your profile can really invite conversation, and you can write it more in your tone. And as far as it relates to like connecting with people, absolutely anytime you're sending a connection request, personalize the note. And so absolutely do that. I mean, it's just so easy to do. The Wake Forest connection, if you have that, that's a go-to. I've never not connected with somebody who shares that Demon Deacon background. And then I also like people, like when you use LinkedIn messages, that can be a lower friction, or if you don't have someone's email address, a way to connect. I would just, when you send that message, to temper your expectations, take a look at that person's profile to gauge how active they are. So there is a section called activity. You can look there to see like, oh, wow, like she hasn't liked or done anything on here in 9 months. So that might be like, okay, like she might not be as active here. That's okay. I might need to find another way to communicate with this person. And the last thing I would say around LinkedIn is if you do send a message, it doesn't, get reciprocated, whatever it is. I'm a big fan of pleasantly persistent. I get this pushback about networking in general. Like it's, like it just feels like like just be pleasantly persistent. If you're asking something like genuinely out of curiosity, people are generally just busy and sometimes miss things. So I think there's room to do follow-up as long as you're pleasant and genuinely curious.
The other thing I would contemplate and advice I would offer, yes to all the things that Megan said. Biggest misnomer is LinkedIn, and I've heard this before, LinkedIn is a platform of lurkers and scrollers. That does not count as activity. That will not get you noticed. That will not increase the chances of someone connecting with you. You have to be active, commenting, sharing, contributing to a group conversation. That constitutes activity, not just lurking and scrolling.
And it's an algorithm. Like the more active you are on the platform, the harder the platform is going to work for you. So in an ideal world, and I did a masterclass this morning on LinkedIn and getting recruiters to apply to you. I loved it. It was amazing. But it's, it's so important to realize that every time you like, comment, share, that it's going into an algorithm that then will promote you, right, to other people to connect with. So the ultimate goal is to get someone to approach you on LinkedIn about a job, and they won't find you if you're not active on the platform.
Yeah. The other thing is write your profile towards where you want to go, not only where you've been. Now, I recognize this can be very daunting to people who are in the mood to make a big move. You have to slowly start filtering that. But for me, and I would invite you all, please send me a connection request. Please personalize it. I can be your practice test dummy. I promise to say yes if you promise to at least write me 300 characters, which is all you get, right? But if you look at my profile, I don't go deep in the weeds of all the call center operations and credit card regulatory environment, because that's not the kind of work I want to do anymore. You can see that I've worked for major Fortune 100 global banks. You can see I have all that work, but what you will find is my leadership development, my coaching style, my investing in other professionals, success, in quantifiable success metrics that show I can get stuff done. What you don't see is the years and years of like very nuanced industry information, because I don't wish to be in that space right now. So I've written especially for those of you, the further you get out from graduation and the more years of working experience you have, it is impossible for you to document everything you've ever done. This is your page. This is your story. Use the first person, use your narrative, because your resume, think about it as a sales funnel. LinkedIn is the trailer. This is the goal here is to capture somebody's attention and say, I want to get to know Katie better. I want to get to know Eric better. I want to get to know Shantae better. right? And hopefully they'll send you a DM to connect. I've got this opportunity I'd like to talk to you about. Are you interested? Can you send me a resume? It's a funnel, but you want to cast the net wide. You want to capture enough attention. And more importantly, you want to stand out. Anybody can regurgitate all these like success metrics. If you're not infusing any of your soft skills superpowers in your narrative, there's 2,000 characters you can use in the about section. Use every single one of them. Tell your story.
Yeah. And I think the other
invite
powerful,
people.
oh, sorry, Kristin.
I'm
In addition to
finished.
telling your story, like in your genuine voice, this is a great way, going back to Matt's question, like you can engage with like recruiters or people, like if people are posting content at target industry, like companies in the industry you're interested in, they want that engagement. Like somebody worked to put that out there so you can get yourself noticed, and that's a low friction way. You can ask a question. Just the like is probably not enough. But I think if you engage when recruiters or people of influence are putting content out on LinkedIn, they're inviting that. So it's maybe a less intimidating way to get noticed and stand out. And people work on that and they want some recognition and engagement. So it's a easy way to engage and kind of see what people are talking about in the target places you might want to go.
I look at it as you're helping them do their work.
Yes.
They've put it out there. I'm looking for a recruiter. I'm looking for a program manager. I'm looking for this. And I'm that person. And I've just made your job so much easier because, right. I'm engaging in this conversation. So we've got 3 minutes left, ladies. We could go on right for hours about this stuff that we're also
covered, or what were you expecting us to cover? What questions are still lingering?
I'm going to open it up to our participants. Who's got a question? What's on your mind? Please go off mute, or if you don't feel comfortable speaking, then drop it in the chat. Like, ask us some questions.
I'll ask one question rather than type it in the chat. I'll just ask. So I also have a longer background in kind of financial services and project management and consulting. And in looking at career pivot, it's more of a passions pivot, like to something completely different. My question is have you ever felt limited in your background if you are doing a pivot more towards like a passion? Like, did you find that to be a limiting factor or do you think that's kind of like a thing of the past? In other words, now, no matter what your background is, can that apply to almost any job, or I would imagine it's probably also what you want to do, because I don't really have the time to go back to school necessarily or anything like that. But I'm worried that, because I'm considering something so different, I'm either going to be viewed as overqualified or just that my background is not aligned at all with that.
That's where I would say, Katie, I mean, you could look at me, right? I had 20-year career history, Bank of America, Capital One, GE, consumer finance, right? And I went into the nonprofit sector. Find ways to showcase how all of that professional acumen and expertise as a professional can apply. Also find ways to immerse yourself in that new passion, whether that's through volunteering, whether that's through some kind of side hustle. Get experience and start talking about it so that people no longer define you by the jobs you've had, but they see you as somebody who's engaged in this new direction, that you've put in time, you've put in interest, you've done your homework, you've started to showcase that, right? And you can be honest, like, let's be clear. The money I was making when I left as a senior vice president at Bank of America compared to my salary today, people, I'm here to tell you there's a reason I have a portfolio career. I took a 60% pay cut. But that's the nonprofit world, and I knew I was going into that, right? I was very realistic about it. So when people on the board were like, whoa, you're coming from this world to this world, but I had good answers for why. And I had demonstrated an interest. So I think you just have to be really intentional and do whatever you can to demonstrate your commitment to the new passion direction. But be honest, call the elephant out in the room. I know you cannot pay me what I was paid at Bank of America. I do not expect that. This for me is about intentionality. I am in a season of my career where I am foregoing some compensation because I believe this is the direction I want the second half of my career to go.
Great advice. Great advice. And we're at 1 o'clock. And I want to respect everyone's time. If someone has a question that didn't get answered during our time together, then please send me an email with your question. We will make sure that it gets addressed. Please find all three of us on LinkedIn. Love Kristin's challenge. I want to see your customized message when you invite me to connect with you. I hope to see you all on Pivot 2. That's coming up on March the 18th, and also at Alumni Weekend, April 19th and 20th. Ladies, it's been absolutely fantastic. I can't thank you enough. It was everything that I had visioned. And I just can't thank you enough for investing your time to provide this content for our alumni here in the School of Business. So thank you so much.
I want to challenge you all to take one small step this weekend. By this weekend, reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, go out of your comfort zone, post something on LinkedIn, call somebody who's in an industry you're curious about. Just do one thing before the end of the weekend that is going to move you in a new direction. Hardest part's getting started.
That's right.
Awesome. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Take care, y'all.
Go Deeks.
Go Deeks.
Go Deeks.